Have you ever been practicing guitar, or maybe trying to write a song, or even driving to that super far away gig wondering to yourself, why am I doing this? And the answer always is, because you have to, because that's the reason you were put on this planet. Well, today's my story about why I make music and why I keep doing this week after week for you. I'll start off with a quote from one of my favorites, Charles Bukowski. Find something that you love and let it kill you. Let that sink in. That's how I feel about music, because it's one of the few things that you can become incredibly proficient at. You could be the best of the best and still pumping gas, barely scraping by. But you have to be good at something else, whether it's marketing, being a t-shirt guy, being a salesperson. It's not just about, can I pick up a guitar anymore? How good is your social media? Can you get it out there? Because music, no matter how awesome it is, it's not filling your bank account so you could pay your electric bill. Not for most people. I knew I had to be a musician. I use the term lifer. Like, I am a lifer. There's nothing I can do about it. I am inexplicably intertwined with all things music and creative. It's who I am. When I was 5 years old, I remember watching on television, there was some program where they were playing Heart and Soul. Now, my mom, she always wanted to be a concert pianist. My grandfather was like, here's a guitar. So the second that I showed any interest in playing music, my mom was like, oh, we're gonna get him into lessons. She dragged me upstairs to the grand piano that we have. She showed me the top part of Heart and Soul. I knew from a young age that this is something that makes me different. This sets me apart. I didn't play sports. I was by no means the cool kid. If anything, I was the weirdo that wore the Iron Maiden and Megadeth shirts to school. I remember one of my teachers pulling me aside when I was in like maybe 5th grade. I was wearing a Megadeth euthanasia shirt, and it had a picture of Vic Rattlehead holding a baby and just euthanasia. My teacher came up to me and she goes, is everything okay? Why would you wear such a scary shirt? Turn it inside out. And I remember thinking to myself that, oh man, this thing's cool. I love Megadeth. But just like knowing if you like boys or girls, or that baseball's your thing, I knew that music and art and writing was what was gonna differentiate me from everybody else. I would never throw a football as far as Matt Salzberg, but I know that in my heart, I could rock, even though none of it came easy to me. You think about someone like Vincent Van Gogh, who goes and paints all these masterworks that sell for hundreds of millions of dollars. And during his life, he was destitute. Nobody cared that he was a painter. It wasn't until after he died anybody appreciated what he was doing, that he was this crazy master. He painted for himself. And I truly believe that real artists, the people that are lifers, not the casual, I'm gonna play some Dave Matthews Band as a hacky sack, but the people that know, like, I have to play this cover gig because if I don't play covers, no one's gonna hire me to do anything unless I wanna go pump gas, clean windshields, and beg for change, which is basically what being a musician is anyway. You could be out on Mass Ave in Boston with your cup out there, please sir, so I can get some porridge. Or you could be right downtown playing the Irish Times and it's still, please sir, put some money in there because I am a broke musician. It's a hard life. So why do we do it? I was fascinated by people like Jim Morrison or Freddie Mercury or Jimi Hendrix, Randy Rhoads, these people that died young, so that every single recording you hang on it. And all these years later, people still care. Every single Doors concert and every single Jimi Hendrix concert that ever was has been pretty much released because people are obsessed with what these guys did. And there's something romantic to me that even if you don't live long, you could be like a guy like Randy Rhoads, who was only 25. And yet, here we are 40 years later, talking about Randy Rhoads, about how his solos on basically less than an hour and a half worth of music, the 2 albums that he made with Ozzy, and that's his legacy, other than a little stuff with Quiet Riot before that. 25 years old, and yet we're here 40 years later talking about every single thing that he ever did. I always want to be remembered like Randy Rhoads, remembered like Freddie Mercury, and no matter what I do, I just want to make something that will last forever. I remember walking home from a piano lesson. This is back when, your parents would say, hey, you can walk 2 miles home at 12 years old and you'll be fine. And I was wearing an Iron Maiden Year of the Beast. These dudes drove by me on the street and they pulled over real quick and they yell out the window, hey man, do you actually listen to Iron Maiden? And I literally went like this, up the irons! I read it inside of one of the records. They gave me that back, and I felt like I was part of like an elite club of rock and roll. I never doubted for a moment that I was going to make it doing music. Finding the best musicians at my local music store and being like, we're gonna play huge shows, just follow me, be in my band, trust me, it's gonna happen. I remember saying that to my guitarist at the time, Joe. And his second show ever, we played in front of 20,000 people with Disturbed at Green Hill Park in Worcester. I was just going off to Northeastern University as a freshman, and within a few months, I was signed to a production deal with a record label. And I remember going to school and wondering, should I study for my math test or should I go practice a guitar solo so I could go to Longview Farm Studios and record the solo that's gonna define my career? And I moved out of my economy triple at Northeastern University into a 5-bedroom, 5,000 square foot, we called it the Playboy Mansion in Sharon, Massachusetts. This house was rad. There was a tennis court, an in-ground pool, chicken coop. It was clearly a brothel at one point or something crazy, and it hadn't been used in years. So we basically had 6 dudes in my band. We got put up here, we got a bunch of recording gear, we got bought all this stuff, and they basically said, right, I am lucky, but also it was kind of sad because I was coming in at the end of what was known as the old school music industry, when there was money. When you got signed, you got $1 million deal, and they put you on radio for 6 weeks, and they try you out for MTV, and they buy you gear. That doesn't happen now. You're lucky if a record label even pays you to have your friend record you in your own basement. It was a crazy time to be in a band. You could go to any club on a Thursday night, and there would be people there just because they wanted to see bands. I remember deferring from college because I was recording a record. Here's a picture of me sitting with all my amps in the control room, which was a crazy Neve board. It was over $1,000 a day to record, and this was the life I was living. It was a wild time to be alive. This is when I learned that being in a band with other people who aren't on the same page as you is literally the worst. It's like being in a marriage with 5 people that all have problems. I'm signed to a record deal, living in this huge house, to moving in with my girlfriend at the time and getting a job at Office Max. It's really crazy that one moment you're playing shows with some of your idols in front of thousands and thousands of people hearing yourself on the radio, and then only a few months later you're doing a planogram for a bunch of folders and pencils. It was a serious fall from grace. I wasn't put on the planet to be a guy at Office Max asking you about what type of paper you need for your wedding invitations. That's not me. I got an incredible position at Comcast. I was the youngest manager in the entire company. I was rough around the edges. I partied like crazy. On the 90th day, they were gonna give me a contract. It was like basically like 90-day trial period. By the way, they gave me a phone. They were paying for all my gas. It was a 6-figure job. I was in charge of literally hundreds of retail locations. And on the 89th day, they pulled me in the office and they basically said, like, look, we think you're really good. You know what you're doing. You're just really young, and we don't know if we can trust you on a management level to represent a company like us. They pretty much took all the wind out of my sails. And I went from making 6 figures one day to making nothing. I remember going to my parents and just being like, what the hell am I gonna do with myself? So they sent me to a career counselor. And the counselor said 2 things. I keep hearing, Ben, that you are talking about music, and it sounds to me like you should be doing something in entertainment, music, whether it's the business side, the recording side, that is you. Well, you should go back to school. And I come from a time, graduate high school, go to school. That's what the good kids do. I didn't have any real perception of money. I didn't know how lucky I was to be able to be afforded an education. My parents dished out like $30,000 just for me to go to Northeastern to be like, no, I'm gonna do this rock and roll thing. So when they sent me back to school, and I'm sitting in all these classes, like, why am I here trying to figure out who I am by throwing myself into classes? Meanwhile, my parents are spending stupid money on school when really what they should have done is just built me a recording studio for the amount of money that they spent to send me to math class and have me read the same books I read in high school over again. If you want to do music, you don't need to go to school, especially now because you have YouTube. You have all these resources at your disposal. So by the time you go to school for your production, there's some nerd like me that took that money and they built a studio and they're already doing it for real on their own. So instead of getting a dorm room, this is when my mom suggested to me, well, maybe you should get a house and build a studio. So I built this recording studio that I'm sitting at here. I did buy a bunch of equipment that was above my pay grade, and I spent years trying to learn how to be good enough for it. And while I was doing this, I got a part-time job at Best Buy. And I'm literally watching the music scene die. We were selling CDs and DVDs and albums all the time. There's releases to slowly started making their CD departments and their movie departments smaller and smaller. People didn't buy them as much. Meanwhile, you have Netflix becoming a thing. Smartphones are keeping people at home. This is when music started dying. People were illegally downloading MP3s. All these clubs that I used to play with my band when we were signed started closing. You would go on a Thursday or Friday night, they'd have 4 or 5 bands. If they were doing those shows, they had more and more bands and you had to start buying on because there wasn't that many people going. But as that's all happening, I'm still living down here in my studio and making music the whole time for me. Being in a band's the worst. Having to get along with a bunch of other personalities. The only thing that started really paying me outside of working part-time at Best Buy was my DJing. Started DJing clubs. Started getting a few $100s a night, then it was $500 a night, then it was a few nights a week as I'm watching the music industry go to crap. But I just kept making music. You have to have this crazy belief in yourself that what you're doing is special, even though it seems like it really isn't and that nobody cares. And that one day, somebody may hear what you've done and feel the same way that you did as you played it. That concept to me always kept me creating and staying creative. And that's when my buddy Jim Foster came to me and said, do you want to do this neurotic guitarist thing? It'd be you in front of a camera talking about all these guitars you have and about music. You have a personality, you have an ability to talk about music and tell stories that's different from people. Whether you love me or hate me, you'll never meet anyone quite like me. When I finally dialed it in with you guys, I'm getting millions of views now, and it seems like you care. I can share in my experiences, getting a 7-figure record contract, having a gold record on my wall, touring, playing for tens of thousands of people, and you still think to yourself, I haven't made it. Well, here's my story, and I'm sticking to it, and I'm here for you guys, and I will continue to make these videos as long as you guys still want to be a part of what I do, because I can't stop, and I won't. Why don't you smash that subscribe button already?